All right, 3D modeling, UVs, big concern, so I'll be focusing on that. Let's see, we're down here, week 5, and our first deliverable will be due this Sunday. So here's the form for the deliverables. The class after this, we're gonna have to spend a good time on peer review, peer feedback. So we'll deal with that next week. But as far as I was trying to open up the Discord server, but it wasn't doing well. A lot of people were, well, I won't say a lot of people, but there were definitely the big issue that people were commenting on was UVs. So I'll be going over UVs, also looking at modeling issues like this one. Why is this giving artifacts? Is it the distance of the camera, or is there overlapping geometry? This is just one of the student projects that was sent to me. But Chris said that he was, I mean, I saw in the forums that he was able to diagnose people and I was able to point him in the right direction. Just make sure when you're writing the forums that you tag myself and him so we get notified. He's also available for evening one-on-one time. We can set that up. Basically, it's any weekday evening, like after 6. But he was saying that a lot of people were contacting directly, and it was a lot of the same questions, which is very common. You guys are going to run into a lot of the same issues as a group, which is why we set up the Discord server and set up the channels. I don't know. It's dead right now. So you very kindly, if you could direct all of your questions into the forums, because everyone else needs to see it. Chances are there's other people having issues, and that's the point of the forums. All right, so moving forward, please contact us through the forums, not directly. And is there any questions of what's expected for Sprint 1 deliverable? So written description, screenshots of your progress, just talking about like what went well, what didn't go well. And then the big thing, if you haven't done it, is start working in Sketchfab. Don't wait until the last day because it's a new workflow, and Chris does cover it, but don't do that type of like newbie mistake where you think that you can do something new on like an hour before it's due, and then that's when we get all the emails and because it's not going to work as expected. All right. And it's okay for your building, your finished deliverable, to look different. Whether that means the model is laid out differently, it's not a tall, skinny building, it's a short, fat one, it's multiple buildings, there's doors on the side, that's great. And it's okay if the materials are different. The walls are made of fire, there's glowing magical symbols on the roof, down the road we make some windows, the windows are made out of like emeralds, whatever. That's the whole point. You're supposed to explore and have fun with it. Yeah, you can play with it. So we're doing a modular workflow where in Maya or whatever your 3D package, you're assembling the parts of this building. But you bring the parts over into the game engine and you can do whatever you want. This whole point of like modular design. So you have these struts, you have these side logs, you have the door, you have the roof, the chimney, but it's all separate. So you can rebuild the buildings as whatever your imagination is. And more than likely, it's probably the best way to go. If you don't feel comfortable yet, just follow exactly. But you can't, it's like impossible to follow to the T. And that's some of the issue the students are having is that I'm going to cover is the UVs, is that your UVs are not going to look exactly like his. And that you're missing, that's, I got to go through UV workflow because it's like right off the bat, you're going to have your discrepancies. Your logs are a little, your walls and are a little bit off. The logs are a little bit off and the doorway's a little bit off. And then when you start projecting in the UV space, it's going to look completely different. And then how you're approaching your UV layout is my main talking point for the day. Yeah, you hand up. Sure. So at least follow along with Chris and build this. And if this thing isn't inspirational for you, at the same time, you could be building something else. You could be learning all the same techniques and just being like, nah, I really like this other thing. And you're building that. You're just going to have to talk about it. I guess in your written description and your screenshots, like show this other concept art, show this other thing you're trying to make, and then show what your finished work is. And the reason it's in Sketchfab is you just post up the link. You got to make sure it's public, not private. But that's in the videos, and you'll be able to we can all just jump around and look at each other. You're not going to get in front of the class. I'm going to do this anonymous surveying, and other people are going to look at it and give you feedback, and that's going to be next week. But don't wait till last minute to do Sketchfab. Just like you don't wait till last minute for Unity or Unreal, because it's not going to go well. But did anyone else have questions on doing the Sprint 1 deliverable, which is due this Sunday? So on Sunday, then we meet on Tuesday, we do reviews, and then we move into Sprint 2. And it's going to be the same cycle. And then we move on to Sprint 3. There's no questions? I guess maybe someone can just write in the chat panel if you can hear me. Okay, the chat panel was like blacked out and it updated. Yeah. Oh, I put, okay, I was thinking of, yep, good call. I was thinking of last year's, I updated dates. I just edit sprint 1 for now, and I'll do the other sprints after. I thought it was due the 21st, right? So Feb 21. I changed the year. No, my fault. Feb 21 of 22. Here, I'm getting the year and the day mixed up. So this one here, oh, Sunday is the 20th. Gotcha. Yep. Or try. All right. There we go. Feb 20th of 2022. Yep. All right. So that's all cleared up. So This is one of the students asked to send a project. Now, I think it's the scale. So if you notice, there's a lot of like black glitchiness. Um, and I don't think it's completely overlapping faces. I'll just try to push this out real quick. Yeah, I think it's his wall thickness. Um, so this is just like one of the gotchas. For the size of this building, so if I zoom out and look at the grid down here, it's really small. So if I switch to meters, we'll get a grid that's a little bit more realistic here. So it looks like this thing is 2 meters, which is about 6 feet by 4 meters. So you can think of like a meter as about 3 feet. It's a little bit more, but it's all right. Just we have to do some type of American conversion. So anyway, 4 by 3 got 12 feet here, and then if I look at it in side view, we got 3, 6, 8, maybe 9. Anyway, I guess you could say like 8 times 3, or it's like 24 feet high. Now, the gotcha that in this situation is just the thickness is relatively so thin that the way that the camera is doing its calculations of how to draw to the screen, we're getting this glitchiness, or what's called Z fighting. It doesn't know which signal face to render, either this one, or if I pull it back, actually if I just make this one little wall and just select hide everything else, it doesn't know if it's this side or this side when it's this far out. As you zoom in, and you could say, oh, does that have to deal with that maybe the face normals are wrong? But if you zoom in, you can see that the normal's pointing out. It's just really small, and the same over there. So they're not pointing in, and the inside's actually black. If you delete this face, this is black. That means it's the back face of this right here. So that's all right. It just happens to be that the thickness of the wall is too thin for how big this structure is. So if I take the back face of it, so you just pull it out into the building and come around here and zoom out, notice that that's the only thing that's not doing this type of Z buffer fighting. So whatever. I just want to make sure that's not an actual geometry issue. So it's not like nice clean quads. There's like some overlapping faces or something. It looked like it's okay. And I think in the game engine, it won't do that. Just I would make them a little bit more thicker. So if this piece of wood is actually this wall unit is actually 6 feet by 9 feet, um, then that means the thickness of it is really small. So I'd have to go look at the grid. I'd have to change the grid up. So there's a way to like divide up the grid even more. Let's see. Let me just take a quick look at that. Display grid. All right. So grid lines every 5 units. Oh, in a subdivision of 5. Okay, I'm going to pop this up to subdivisions. Did not see apply. All right, I think the grid. So let's say if that's indeed the case. Let me switch the colors on these. So say subdivision of, I think I was counting the numbers wrong. See here. Grid lines every 5 units, a subdivision, 5 subdivisions. Grid lines and numbers are gray. Promising the green. Now you just divide it up more and see what happens. Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. So if this is 5 and there's 10, okay. So if this gray out here is 5 units, this is 5 units. That means this each one is 1 unit. Okay, so I was counting them right. In this case, it's so thin. I'm gonna do 50 units subdivisions, and this is 5. So it's each one is a tenth of a meter, which would be 10 centimeters. So if this is 10 centimeters, so this line here represents 10 centimeters. This is like 1 or 2 centimeters. So it's like super, I mean, there's like, so there's 100 centimeters in a meter. I forget how many centimeters, so 2 centimeters to an inch. So it's about an inch. So you have this massive wall panel that I'm just going to pop this back to what I was meter range. So basically, you have this massive thing that's like 6 feet by 9 feet, and it's 1 inch thick. So the problem with that is it's not realistic, but secondly, it's screwing up the way that the camera renders at such a far distance. Basically, a 2 centimeter difference or 1 inch difference between 2 planes when you're this far out, they're like the approximation gets so off that they can't tell the actual distance between the two. So long story short, just think about your depths as you're modeling. And again, I don't think you're going to see this happening in the game engine. But if it is, maybe just like fluff it, move into the inner walls, the inside, and just pull stuff back a little bit. But so I deviated a little bit. But I think that was good to cover. So the two major things that are the archway in the door and the rounded roof are what's causing people issues right now anyway, because they're the more complicated objects. So UV editor. If I select the archway, it's just a bunch of, let me minimize some of this stuff. All right, I got my UV editor, got my UV toolkit. I'll pop this thing off, just move it over here and just say, this is my UV tools, or my main projection, my main tool sets. Here's a toolkit that'll more smaller tools to work with it. And here's my UV space. So see, it repeats out and out and out and out. We're only really interested in this little square here. This is 0 to 1, 0 to 1. I want all my UVs laid out into here, and it's not going to look the way Chris did. So the way UVs work is like taking a 3D object and splaying it out. It's like taking the skin of it and unwrapping it. It's like, how do we make this 3D object sit in 2D space so that you can put a 2D texture on it, and all the different 3D spaces can understand how it receives the texture. Now, a common technique is to apply just a basic, I'll put a Lambert, just no shininess material. And in the color channel, I'm going to plug in checker pattern. Now you don't see anything, but if I turn on textured mode, we start to see the texture. Now you know that you have a nice unwrapping when there's a nice texture pattern all over it. That there's no distortions, the squares look like squares, and the squares are nicely repeatable and tileable all over the place. Then you know, okay, it looks good. I can go bring this into my texturing package. Right now, this doesn't look good. You got like one half is white, one half is black. If I look at it from this way, there's these weird stripes. I look at it over here, it's a little weird. So this is our beginning stage. It just doesn't look right. It's okay. You're done modeling. You can like call it a day with that. We got to start looking at the UVs. Now UVs are very messy. It's very arty, crafty. There is no like set procedure, do this, this, and this, and you'll be done. It takes experience to understand when it looks good, and then you start to do it more, and you like get ideas of how you want to use your UV space, and sometimes you want to put multiple models linked to one UV space. Sometimes you don't, and there's like depends how your studio's working. There's a million and one things. It's just the more you do it, the more different techniques you can do, and you can do more interesting, optimized situations. I just want to unwrap this thing into this space. Now look at the space, the UV space. Since I put this material on it, the UV space is showing this texture. It's already showing this nice checkerboard pattern. And I don't see that nice checkerboard pattern on the 3D object, meaning the translation from 2D space to 3D space, the way that the UVs are connecting the 2D texture to the 3D model is not good. There's no right or wrong. It's an artistic call. It's a quality call, but it looks like crap right now. So let's try to make it look better. So what Chris was saying is that the first step is here, your UV main drop down. The first thing he said was just do a planar unmapping. So a common thing, take the whole object, and an automatic mapping, if I click on it, and notice that there's like these little planes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like doing a planar mapping, and there's 6 here. It looks at each face and says, "Oh, is this face in all the 6 directions, positive X, negative X, positive Y, positive Z, negative Z. Of those 6 directions are cardinal axi. This face, which direction is it most facing of those 6? Then we project in that direction for that face. Now, you're not going to get a perfect projection, but it's a good start. It gets us going. That's why we do an initial projection. And now we can look at it. It's starting to look a little bit better. Still messy. Now the UVs are sitting on the space. There's a way to dim it. Oh, nice. There's this kind of UV texture. You can click here, and it kind of does what I was doing manually, but it kind of has it. So you can use this instead of doing a checker pattern if you want. In either case, yeah, image dimming control. Okay, I just wanted to dim the image because it's kind of hard to see the UVs. Now, next step, start taking some big chunks of it that's easy to deal with, and let's start selecting it. So you can select face mode, or you can select UV shell. In either case, a UV shell is a set of UVs that are cut off from the rest. They're separated. So as I move this, notice the front of this thing is, the UVs are changing, but if I look at the side in this other area, it's not doing anything because I'm not moving those UVs. But if I select this one and move it, it is changing. Yeah. Yes. But the package that you're moving into, usually you want all your UVs to have a unique space because you might do like little special, you might have like oil droplets and black scratch texture. So like everything's going to be repeatable texture. You can have the things overlap and they'll just share texture space. But you're going to be using like a sophisticated texturing tool where you can do things I just talked about, where you get like really unique texturing characteristics on it. And so you might want them all to have their own individual texture space, UV space. But again, the more you do this over and over again, the more you're already thinking how I want it. Sometimes you want to save space, sometimes you don't. But this is the front of the archway, and this is the back over here. These are two nice big pieces. They already were cut up nicely. It starts at this face down here, comes all the way around to this part. That's good. Maybe sometimes you want to like cut it in the middle and you want one big half and then one big half. It all really just depends. But this works out really well for me. And so this one and this one are like good. I don't really need to do much more to it. Now the rest of it's going to be much harder. But that's because these things are facing directly along an axis. Any part of the model that is directly facing X or Y or Z is going to be very easy to deal with because the projection is like super straight on. But such as the case of 3D models where the shape or the form is really complicated, a lot of it is just not going to be directly pointing at an axis. But that's why we have more sophisticated tools. So in the UV toolkit, I'm just going to come down to unfold. I'm just going to click unfold and see what it does. And in this case, if you saw on the bottom left, it was like a little, it was really quick. It just says it was like it was processing. Now the shape, what an unfold does is it looks at each face. So let me just grab this one here. This little UV space corresponds to this face over here. It's just this face is living in 3D space on a 3D model. Its UV representation is over here. So as I move it, notice it's like distorting the two faces next to it, which you don't want to do that right now. But what unfold does is it looks at the face in 3D space. It looks at the face or the little UV section that's in 2D space, and it tries to get it like one-to-one. Like it moves the little vertices around to be like, no, you want this much texture space for this much of the face. Now here, nothing happened because it's aligned with the vertex, with the axis, and we're all good to go. I just wanted to run the tool just to be sure. You just never know. So these are good. I'm going to move them aside, outside my UV space. I'm going to forget about them. What's next here? All right, we got this big section thing here, right? So I click up here. It's this thing. I click here. It's this thing. It looks like there's an even little thing here. And I move it, and it's got this bottom thing too. And I don't want to deal with this little bottom thing right now. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle it. I don't want to think about it. So I'm going to select this little edge. Notice white edges mean it's cut. Blue edges mean it's still connected in the UV space. Look at the little blues that are within the white. So the white means some UV cuts have happened and separated. So I want to cut this thing. It's blue, it's connected. I don't want that. So I can go into cut and cut it. I'll click off it, it's white. So I go back to UV shell and select this thing, and it's separate. Awesome, that's what I want. I don't want to deal with this thing right now. So I go up here. This thing's perfect. Let's see, UV shell. This thing is great, and it doesn't wrap around. Awesome. So these 4 parts make up this big thing. Now I've got some things to think about. What do I want to do with this space? It looks like crap. It's stretched out. And just to show you, if you kind of can stretch it and deal with it, like this is kind of how it should look. Right? That's kind of looking better. I want to get there. I don't need to even worry about this right now. I need to first think about where my cuts are going to be. What am I, where do I want to place these cuts? Maybe I don't need them. Maybe, usually though, I'll place a cut like right at the top up here. So I'll start thinking, where's the player going to be when they're running around the world? How are they going to see this archway? Technically, the back part of the archway sits up against the building. You don't see it. You could just delete that part of the model and not even deal with it. But sometimes you want to reuse parts over and over again. You don't know if that will ever be exposed. So, hey, be safe. Leave it there. It makes it more usable for the level designer. But if this doorway is the size of a person can't see the top of the thing. So then I'd be like, all right, I'm going to put a cut way at the top because no one would ever see it. And even if like the texture flows nicely along the sides and there's a weird cut and then the texture flows nicely and the texture cut like breaks the immersion, the player's like, that looks like crap. It doesn't make me think it's a real stone doorway. Who cares? Because they would never see it at that angle. They would always be looking at it from down up like this. So you always try to introduce cuts in like strategic spots where either there's a realistic break in the material or the player would never see that thing to begin with. And sometimes you can't, you just have to have a cut out in the open and just do your best to like blend it and make it like, there's too many things going on. The player won't notice it. So this is where I want my cut. So I'm going to introduce a cut here. And now I click off, there's a white thing. And these are separate shells. I can move this without the other side, right? I wasn't able to do that before. Awesome, so let's work my way up. So I want to find the edge that this one, I want to start, you have to start on one side, yeah. Yes, so cut and sew, that's why cut and sew are together. I'll be doing some, actually I'm going to start doing some sewing. So usually I start at one little edge way off on the side and I start sewing up what I want. So I click on it, it's this edge here. Cool, so what's this? Oh, it's this thing down here. So I want to move this thing up here. I want to get it close. Now this is common. I click on one and it's corresponding to the edge on the other side of it. So what happened is if the one is flipped upside down, one is like reversed. Okay, you know, when you're translating a 3D object in 2D space, you're going to get a bunch of funkiness. This is why it's like you have to craft it back together. So you just got to pick one of these shells and just flip it. It doesn't really matter right now. So if you go up to transform and just rotate it, you can just rotate it 90, rotate it 90 again. It acts like a full 180 rotation. Now when I click on it, they're pointed toward each other. So now there's some sewing tools. So if I just sew it, notice how it took the average position between the two and it placed the edge on top of it. I'll undo that. That's why I spent the time moving them close and I flip them around so that they're aligned really well and really close. Because when I sew, it's going to take that average position of the two edges and make one. And then there's stitch together, which takes the smaller UV shell and moves it over to the larger UV shell. Sometimes that's useful. In this case, that's what I wanted. But just to know there's sew and stitch together. And A to B or B to A. Take the smaller to the larger or take the larger to the small. In this case, this was what I wanted. Great. So now I click there. So now I'm way at the bottom, way at the top. That's one piece. I'm done. So now it's seeing it's relating to this thing down here. So I don't want to sew this to it, but I will move it up close because you want like a conceptual map, something that's easy to move around, understand what, because when you look at a whole bunch of pieces in 2D, it's very confusing what's going on. So I'm going to flip this thing just because I just want the edges to be aligned, but I'm not going to sew it. So I'm going to move on to this thing over here. And I noticed that the edges weren't aligned, so I'll flip it. They're aligned. That's great. I'll do a stitch together. Pop to there. Looks like we just have one little face, this little thing down here. This guy's really messed up. It's okay. That's what our unfold will help us with. So I'll move them there, and it looked like I had to flip them. And then I'll just do a stitch together. It pops it over. Now we have a nice big circle section of this thing. Now I'll select this one, and this you can just select both, and we're going to unfold them. Now notice it kind of like pulled them out. It rotated a little bit, but I mean the amount of work it saved you, that thing never used to be available a few years ago. It's like a huge time saver. But sure, I can rotate it around. The next step is, okay, I've got this side and this side, and I'm starting to get a consistent look to this thing. The next thing is scaling. So let me just scale these things up so it's super easy to like see the squares. And then I'm going to scale this thing up, and I'm going to try and get the squares to be the same size by sight. They're starting to get tools that will do this for you, but that's more or less very close. So you don't, this is called texels, are the size of the texture that can be placed on a space, on a face, on a polygon. So if your size isn't right, and if you ever seen textures placed on 3D model and they're blocky, they're pixely, it's because they didn't have a lot of texture space. So you couldn't place a high res texture onto the face of the model. So I'm just scaling it up so it's easy for me to understand the size of the squares here and the size of the squares here. And they're all occupying the same texture size, which is going to be important. I'm just going to keep them at that size and move them up because I'm not done yet. Now it looks like we got a little strip in here, and that finishes the model. So I'm going to do a similar thing. Now notice that, I guess I'll just talk, notice that there is a cut at the top. Everything flows so nicely up here, and then it hits the cut, and there's a big divide. Like it's not a nice, seamless, tileable texture. But again, the user won't look up here. But the user might be able to see that there isn't like a seam, like the squares don't flow from the front to the top. So you have to be aware of that. And if you actually pay attention in your game, you'll see that there's that kind of break a lot. But you don't really pay attention to it or you got used to it. So you do have to know that there will be a cut there. So another technique, if it's really important to not have a seam there, is you might be able to like do it the other way. You might be able to wrap around this way and get rid of this seam here, but then you have to have introduce like cuts up here going the other direction. So in this situation, I think this is the best solution. Now it will introduce a cut here, which is in the middle of this thing. And the user will see that, but it's like super small. So I'll just hope that they won't recognize it. So then I'll select the UV shell on this side. And I'll see what edge. Okay, this is the center edge. All right. So I'll rotate it 90 counterclockwise, and there's the edge there. So also this edge relates to there. Counterclockwise rotation. And that edge is good. So I'll stitch together. Starting to sit on something else, so move it over. And that's the very bottom. Yep. So we're good. And I'll do the same thing on this one here. That's the very bottom. Well, sure, it's very, I can take this one, that's the very bottom, I'll rotate it clockwise. Yep. Then this here, and rotate counterclockwise. And yep, they line up. Stitch. Then we got this thing. Just the bottom foot. Now, one thing, before I complete the UVs on this thing, there's actually a modeling issue where this vertex is sitting way off here by himself. And it's not creating a polygon, it's just a line. So we have to fix that before I can complete the UVs. So I think I can just use like a weld, like a vertex weld tool. Wedge. Let's see, average vertices. What if I click on it? Create, is that another one? No. All right. Yeah, you can't, I could, I guess, select the edge and just delete it. I've never seen delete, but I'll give it a try. Yeah, okay, the tools have been updated. Usually you had to go and weld that. The delete vertex tool wasn't very good. It could like crash more often than not. But it does delete the edge and it deletes the vertex along with it. So shift 5 and UVs. Okay. So I wanted to get rid of that. Usually you're supposed to have your model done before you go into UV space, but it didn't mess the UVs up. So who am I going to attach this to? It really doesn't matter because you're never going to see it. So again, you can delete it, which I'm kind of tempted to do. Or I'll see which face I want to join it to. I guess I could just join it there. You got to flip it. Okay. And I got to pull out. He's like really distorted. Oh, looks like there's a vertex. Oh, because there's like an inner lip. So I'll just pull this out. Yeah, you can snap to other UVs. You can snap to the grid. So all the same tools that are in 3D are in 2D. Yep. And then this thing relates to this edge over there. All right. So take this thing, I'll rotate it, sew it up, and then take the UVs. Bring them out. And there's a little distortion down here. I could, but again, I don't really care. It's on the foot. As long as it's close enough. It's not like a high impact area. The one thing I didn't do, I didn't scale these up to fit the rest. You know what? I got to unfold it. Here we go. All right, that looks about right. So I'll move them up. I got 6 pieces I got to think about. So I'm gonna put them on top of each other just because it's easy. I'm gonna scale them down. I'm gonna move them back. Scale them down. All right. At least I'm in the space. All right. Notice as I zoom out, the squares are so big, I just can't really see what's going on. But since I already did my adjusting, I know everything's good. And so again, I'm gonna aim for unique space. So I could take, usually I take these big curvy pieces and I'll rotate them around so that maybe they fit on top of each other. Maybe I'll let them kind of ride around each other's ring a little bit and I'll see if I can fit something else in there. Um, then I'll take these and I can just throw them down here. So now we want to try to really get the space as best as we can. So I look at like the hero pieces. I look at the parts that's really important to get as much texture space as possible. So that's the big top parts of these for me anyway. And so these, I'm going to want it to fill up the whole side of the UV space. Notice I'm growing everything so that they stay consistent, but I'm positioning it and I'm just going to move from like left to right. I want these two to fill up the space as best they can, which I achieved. And then I'll position these and so the other thing to think about, let me try flipping it. One thing I'll think about is that, oh, this is the back face. I would never really see it that much. So I might, personally, I would scale it down a little bit. So the texture will appear a little bit smaller or larger on it, like 90%, 85%. But again, no one's gonna see that side, and then there's that off chance I might reuse this thing and might see it, but it's still not. So either you look at something from this side or you look at it from this side. You're not gonna be able to see the back and the front at the same side. So if the back, the texture is like a little bit smaller or bigger, you wouldn't see it at the same time as that one. So to me, this saves like the most space, whatever. But you see that there's a lot of empty space. So then I might be like, oh, well, I can use, maybe I want to put this thing in the same UV space as this. But that's you start moving around and you start, but this is just one part. And yes, your UVs are not going to look like Chris's. That's okay. As long as they look good, as long as the checker pattern looks appropriate, then you're good to go. But yeah, if you have to head out, sure. So yeah, so just get the UVs done so that they look good. They look like squares, and you try to remove the seams as much as you can, and you start to combine parts into the same UV space. And it's okay to have a few parts different spaces or whatever. Is there any questions on that? In fact, Chris might guide you one way or the other to prepare for Substance Painter. So it's okay to take a bunch of objects and scale down their UVs, and they're all like sitting in this one UV space, and their UVs are really small because you might have a larger texture space. So you might go up to, you might have heard of like 1K, 2K, 4K textures. That's 1024 by 1024 pixels, or 2048 by 2048 pixels, or 4096, or yeah, by 4096 pixels. It's just the image size is bigger, so you can fit more in it. So it's okay if there's more parts within a space that needs it. Now, something like this, I want to see if it would lay out texture. But all these different parts are unwrapped. Yeah. All right. So like here, you cannot understand what all this is, but it's okay. But look how packed everything is in here. And there's all of these different parts of the 3D model are laid out with unique UV space. And that now we can go into Substance Painter and paint all over the place. Whereas something like this is like a first step toward unwrapping, but they're not using up their space and things aren't sewn together. Here you might end up with something like this, where they're all laid out. But these are very complicated objects or very organic objects that these are. At least with something like this, you can start to identify kind of the machined parts that these might be. Here you go. Here's a one-to-one. Here you go. Here's this type of machine, sci-fi RPG or whatever it is, and here's the UVs laid out. And then this is a type of sample testing texture to let you see how the UVs are being laid out on the 3D model. All right, here's a more cylinder thing, almost like a vase or like a sculpture, but here's the sides, here's the top. I don't think the sides would, yeah, maybe they're laid out like that. There's just, there's one big seam somewhere. And here's a sword laid out. All right, does that all make sense? Any questions? Luckily, you're doing architecture parts, which are very like symmetric and more like cylinders and like a primitive geometry than like something like an organic thing like this sumo guy. With these more organic shapes they have to deal with. But the tools have gotten a lot stronger. All this is a lot easier to deal with. You just have to think about how to slice out, strip down, and put edge, how to put cuts down to lay a 3D object out in a 2D space. And you're not gonna. The point of following Chris's videos is not a one-to-one. Yours is gonna look very unique. And then you might even go into Substance Painter, and you might start to identify issues. You might have to go back to Maya, and you might have to fix your UVs and then send it back into Photoshop to Substance Painter. But if there's no questions, you can head out. Otherwise, you can hang out, ask me something. And this Sunday is the drop. And whatever you have, just drop it. Yep. For the first spring. Yeah, it's gonna be a very basic Substance Painter workflow because we get to this state. It's nothing crazy. These are just tileable textures. So how to put it on the chimney, the roof, the wall, the wood sides. Okay. Yeah, or just contact me. I would start meeting with Chris in the evenings at 6 p.m. To help speed you up. You just drop something, even if it's like half a building. Just get something in Sketchweb. The big issue is when you don't drop anything and it can't review you. That's going to be a problem. So just make something, even if it's partial. Huh? Okay. I definitely recommend, just if you can, just set up evening one-on-one. Chris can get you along with just speeding through, but you're going to hit issues and you're going to have to meet with them. So first yeah, it's the same thing. So I had my friend who is a 3D modeler in the industry go through Maya into Substance Painter into Unreal in like an industry workflow. And then the lecture videos are from him, and he's available in the evenings for tech time. We have a Discord server for help during regular time, and I'm just giving you fundamentals of the tools in computer graphics. And the videos I make are up on